I was scrolling through my feed the other day when I came across a video filmed inside a Target in St. Paul. It started out mundane, just the familiar red and white aisles, until the camera caught a few federal immigration officers walking past the household goods. Suddenly, a man began following them. He wasn't just protesting, he was unraveling, shouting profanities and describing in graphic detail exactly how he'd beat them if they weren't wearing those badges. What was truly jarring, however, wasn't the man's outburst. It was the atmosphere in the store. You'd expect a sense of awkwardness or for people to look away, but the opposite happened. Other shoppers started cheering. As the officers moved toward the exit, a small crowd formed, following them into the parking lot like a taunting shadow, shouting insults until the officers drove away. The officers remained entirely silent, their faces masks of professional indifference as they retreated. When I was growing up, a scene like that in a suburban retail space would have been unthinkable. There was a shared, unspoken social contract regarding how you conducted yourself toward lawful authority in public, regardless of your politics. But watching that footage, I realized that the line didn't just move, it seemingly vanished. It wasn't just one person acting out, it was a collective giddy reinforcement of intimidation. It left me with this unsettling realization. The guy shouting wasn't worried about consequences because in that moment, he was being socially rewarded. His aggression wasn't seen as a lapse in character, but as a performance of virtue. It made me wonder, how did we get to a point where public harassment isn't just tolerated, but celebrated? And if the officers are trained to simply walk away, what happens to a society when the loudest, most hostile voice in the room is the only one that never has to stop?
It's a scene that really sticks with you, doesn't it? It has this almost surreal quality.
Totally.
It feels like something out of a dystopian novel, but you said it, it's just a Tuesday in St. Paul. And I think the reason it hits a nerve isn't just because it's loud or, aggressive. It's because it feels like a structural failure.
That's exactly it. That's the perfect word for it. It didn't feel like a protest in the traditional sense. It felt like a glitch in the simulation. And that's what I really want to figure out today. I don't care about the specific politics of the immigration agency involved. People can debate policy all day long. I'm interested in the conduct.
The behavior itself.
Yes, the behavior. I want to know why the shoppers cheered. I want to know why the officers just walked away. And I want to know what happens next. Where does this go?
Well, to answer that, I think we have to look at authority not as a person with a badge, but as a concept, as a social agreement. And we've pulled together a lot of research for this deep dive. We're going from sociology from the 19th century all the way up to legal theory on how communities drift away from the law, and some pretty terrifying new data on how algorithms are actually training us to act this way.
Right, and the stack of sources is fascinating. We've got papers on something called legal estrangement, classic work on Anomie, which we'll definitely need to define, and some comparative administrative law that, and I was shocked, isn't as boring as it sounds.
Not at all. It's surprisingly gripping.
It actually explains why our institutions feel like they're crumbling from the inside out.
It really does. It connects the dots between let's say, a bureaucracy that's lost its way and a guy screaming his lungs out in a Target.
So let's start there. Let's start with the atmosphere in that store. I mentioned this unspoken social contract in the intro. To me, it feels like that's the first thing that broke.
It is. That's the foundational crack. And to understand that breakage, we have to go back to a concept that's been around for over 100 years, but it fits 2024 perfectly. It's called anomie.
I see that word in the notes. It sounds like enemy, but it's not related, is it?
No, though the result can certainly feel hostile. It comes from Émile Durkheim, one of the founding fathers of sociology, a French sociologist. He coined it back in the late 1800s. And people often misuse anomie to just mean chaos, like a riot or mayhem.
Just general disorder.
Exactly. But Durkheim was getting at something much more clinical, much more specific. He wasn't talking about noise. He was talking about normlessness.
Normlessness. So a lack of rules.
Not just written rules, like laws. He meant the invisible social bonds, the guardrails that regulate how we treat each other. In a healthy society, there are these guardrails. If you're in a grocery store and you start screaming profanities at a stranger, you expect a certain reaction from the herd.
Right. You expect disapproval. You expect people to recoil, to look at you like you're crazy.
That social pressure is a brake on your behavior. It keeps most of us in line.
It's the shame mechanism, for lack of a better word. Even if I'm serious about something, I don't scream in the cereal aisle because I don't want to be that guy, the crazy guy in the cereal aisle.
Exactly. Anomie is the specific condition where those brakes fail. The norms that usually contain our worst impulses simply evaporate. The disapproval doesn't come, the guardrails vanish. And suddenly you're in this state of social freefall where the only rule is that there are no rules.
Which, that brings me back to another story I wanted to bring up. It's almost identical to the intro, but I want to focus on a different angle of it. I want you to try to imagine a veteran officer, let's just call him David. He's been on the job for 20 years. He grew up, really believing in this social contract. If you protect the peace, the community, in turn, offers a baseline of respect.
The standard agreement, the implicit deal.
Right, the deal. But then he finds himself in a situation, just like the Target video. He's standing near the electronics section, maybe just buying a phone charger on his day off, and suddenly he's surrounded. People are chanting insults, phones are in his face, he hasn't arrested anyone, he hasn't drawn a weapon. He is simply the target of this collective, aimless rage.
Just for being what he is.
Exactly. But the part that breaks him, according to this story, isn't the shouting. It's looking out at the faces of the other customers, people he might have protected a week ago at a car accident, and seeing them cheer. That's the Anomie moment, isn't it? That's the glitch.
It is. That's the clinical definition right there. Because for David, the world has ceased to make sense. The rules he operated under for 20 years have just vanished in an instant. But we have to ask the next question. Why is the crowd behaving that way? Durkheim gives us the what, but a later sociologist, an American named Robert K. Merton, he gives us the why.
Okay.
He extended Durkheim's theory to talk about the gap between goals and means.
Goals and means. Can you unpack that?
Sure. Think about it this way. Every society has what Merton called cultural goals. These are the things we are all told to want. Success, status, respect, feeling like a good person, being a virtuous citizen.
The American dream, basically.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And society also provides institutionalized means to get those things working hard, following the law, being polite, voting, playing by the rules of the game.
Okay, so the goal is be a success, and the means is get a job and work your way up.
Right. Merton argued that anomie happens when the social structure prevents large groups of people from achieving those goals through the legitimate means, when the game feels rigged. When that happens, people start to innovate. And in sociology, innovation doesn't mean inventing the next iPhone.
Yeah.
It means breaking the rules to get the reward.
So apply that to the guy screaming in Target. What's his goal? Is it policy change?
Probably not in that moment. His goal might be more immediate. It might be social status. He wants to be seen as a warrior for his cause. He wants clout. Or maybe, on a simpler level, he just wants to feel powerful in a world where he feels powerless.
Okay, that makes sense.
But he feels that the legitimate means, voting, writing a letter to his congressman, even peaceful, organized protest, he feels those don't work. He thinks the system is rigged against him. So he innovates. He breaks the norm of public civility to get the status he craves.
And because the crowd cheers, the innovation works. He gets the reward instantly.
Precisely. The social break we talked about earlier, in that moment, it's been replaced by a social accelerator. The crowd is telling him, yes, this is correct. This is how you achieve status now. This is virtue.
Wow. This connects to that paper we have on the informal economy and its relationship with the state. It talks about the psychological contract. I've always found this idea so interesting because, I never signed a contract with the government. I was just born here. But the paper argues I did sign something, at least mentally.
It's the implicit deal of citizenship. It goes all the way back to Enlightenment thinkers like Hobbes and Locke. You, as a citizen, sacrifice a portion of your absolute freedom. You agree to stop at red lights, you pay taxes, you don't punch people you disagree with.
Right.
And in exchange for that sacrifice, the state promises to provide basic things. Infrastructure, safety, a sense of order.
It's a trade. I give up my right to drive 100 miles per hour through a school zone, and you, the state, ensure the roads aren't a Mad Max-style free-for-all.
That's the deal. But the research suggests that when citizens begin to view the state as corrupt or disengaged or fundamentally unfair, they feel the state has breached that contract. And here's the key psychological shift. Once you feel the other party has broken the deal, you no longer feel a moral obligation to hold up your end.
So the logic becomes, you didn't fix the potholes and you didn't keep my neighborhood safe, so why on earth should I be polite to your officer?
That's it in a nutshell. That Target incident is a visual representation of the psychological contract snapping in real time. It's the moment the citizen stands up and effectively says the deal is off.
And looking at the progression of this behavior, it feels terrifyingly fast. The notes you put together mention a 3-step process that I found really chilling. Step 1 is socially prohibited. That's the old world, right? You scream at a cop, you're the bad guy, everyone looks at you.
That's the world Officer David thought he was living in.
Step 2 is socially tolerated. That feels like the transitional phase we've been in for a few years. People might not cheer, but they don't intervene. They look at their shoes. They pretend they don't see it.
The bystander effect goes collective.
And step 3 is socially rewarded.
And that's the target video. That's where we are now. The behavior is actively incentivized by the crowd. But I want to push back on something you said a little earlier about the officer. You asked, why didn't they do anything? And it's easy to assume they were just scared or passive or maybe incompetent.
Well, yeah. I mean, my first instinct is, why are you letting this happen?
And that's a natural reaction. But there is a massive legal dimension here that we absolutely need to unpack.
Yeah, I was surprised by this part of the research. You'd think screaming threats at a federal agent is a crime. To a layperson, hearing, "I'm going to beat you," sounds like assault.
It sounds like it, absolutely. But the courts, especially the U.S. Supreme Court, see it very differently. The U.S. legal system places a massive, and I mean massive, burden on law enforcement to absorb verbal abuse. The court has held, in various ways across different cases, that officers are expected to tolerate a level of hostility and contempt that would absolutely be actionable if it were directed at a civilian.
So it's literally part of the job description to get yelled at.
Essentially, yes. It's tied to the First Amendment. Unless the speech falls into a very, very narrow legal category of fighting words, which means it has to be an immediate incitement to violence right now or a true threat, the officer is constitutionally required to take it.
But the guy in the video said, "I would beat you." That sounds like a true threat.
But notice the careful or maybe accidental conditional phrasing. If you weren't wearing that badge, legally that creates ambiguity. It's not, "I am going to hit you right now." It's a hypothetical performance of aggression. And from a policy standpoint, most law enforcement agencies have decided that engaging with this kind of bait is a losing game. It's a trap.
Ah, so that quote from the notes makes sense now. Calm withdrawal becomes policy compliance.
Exactly. It's a tactical decision. If the officer engages, it escalates. It looks terrible on the inevitable video. They might get sued by the person baiting them. So the training overwhelmingly is walk away. De-escalate by leaving the situation.
Okay, but let's think about the signal that sends. We just talked about social learning. If I'm a teenager watching that scene, let's say I'm 15, I don't know the Supreme Court case law on fighting words. What am I seeing?
You're seeing that the guy shouting has all the power. You're seeing that the uniform, which is supposed to represent the authority of the state, is retreating. You're seeing that the most hostile behavior produces no negative consequence whatsoever. In fact, it produces a victory lap as they're chased out of the store.
So it creates a feedback loop, a dangerous one.
An incredibly powerful one. Hostile behavior leads to no punishment, which means observers see this, and then imitation replaces inhibition. You learn that this is how you win, this is how you get what you want.
Imitation replaces inhibition. It's a haunting phrase. It means we aren't just losing control of the present moment, we're actively training the next generation that this is the new baseline for public interaction.
And that leads directly to the next critical question, which is who on earth is going to want to be an officer in that future? Because if the social contract is broken for the public, you can be damn sure it's broken for the people we ask to enforce it.
That's the perfect transition to the internal crisis within these institutions. Because we can talk about the crowd all day, but the institution is made of people. And it seems like those people are checking out.
They are. In droves.
I was talking to a friend recently who told me about a guy named Elias. Elias is the son of a retired precinct commander in Chicago. I mean, think about that lineage police work wasn't just a job for this family, it was their identity. For generations, they viewed law enforcement as this ultimate meritocratic ladder. You serve the city, you take the risk, and in exchange, you earn a seat at the table of civic respect.
The old school view of public service.
Exactly. The classic view. But Elias, he recently got into the police academy. He had the slot, and he turned it down. He told his father that the word accountability had mutated into something he didn't even recognize anymore.
Mutated how?
He said it wasn't about being a good cop versus a bad cop anymore. That was a distinction he could handle. He said he realized the institution itself had been delegitimized in the eyes of his peers, his entire generation. To his friends, wearing the uniform wasn't a neutral job. It was a moral stain.
Wow, a moral stain. That's powerful language.
Isn't it? It devastated his dad. But just try to imagine the psychological weight of that. Elias felt that if he put on that badge, he was being prejudged as a systemic failure before he even walked his first feet. So he walked away. And it made me realize we aren't just losing numbers in recruitment, we're losing the quality. We're losing people like Elias, thoughtful, capable, legacy candidates who believe in service. They're opting out.
And this is where we need to introduce a really heavy-hitting concept from a paper in the Yale Law Journal. It's called legal estrangement.
Estrangement, like you're estranged from your family. That sounds so final.
It's a very specific choice of words by the scholar Monica C. Bell, and it's meant to be that serious. Usually when we talk about police reform, the key word we always hear is legitimacy.
Right. Police legitimacy.
And legitimacy is basically a transaction. Do you trust the police? Are they polite to you? Do they treat you fairly? If they are polite and fair, you voluntarily comply. So the solution to a legitimacy deficit is usually something called procedural justice training cops, to be nicer, to listen more, to be neutral arbiters.
The idea is, if I explain why I pulled you over in a respectful way, you won't hate me or the system.
Exactly. But Professor Bell argues that for many communities, that ship has sailed. Legal estrangement isn't about individual interactions anymore. It's a structural orientation. It's a collective feeling of being stateless.
Stateless? You mean like a refugee, but within your own country?
In a psychological sense, yes. It's the feeling that you live within the borders of a country, you are subject to its laws, and more importantly, its brute force. But you are fundamentally excluded from its protection. You don't feel like a citizen with rights. You feel like a subject who is being occupied.
So when Elias's friends say the uniform is a moral stain, they aren't just saying that specific cop is bad. They're saying something much bigger. They're saying the police are just another gang.
That's the exact quote Bell uses in her research, drawn from her interviews. The police are just another gang. And if you truly believe that, then everything changes. Shouting at them in a target is no longer harassment. It's resistance. It's fighting back against an occupying force.
And how does this spread? Because, not everyone in that target was from a historically marginalized community. It looked like a pretty diverse suburban crowd. Not everyone has had a negative run-in with the law.
This is where the concept of vicarious marginalization comes in. And this is a crucial concept for the digital age. You don't need to be personally mistreated by the police to feel estranged.
You just need to watch the video.
You just need to watch the video. The consumption of these clips over and over is the vector of transmission. Our collective memory starts to act as a filter. We all have a negativity bias anyway, but this amplifies it. If you have 10 perfectly fine neutral interactions with a cop in your life, and you see one video of an officer acting unjustly, or ironically, one video of an officer looking weak and ineffective, it reinforces the narrative that the entire system is broken.
Wait, explain that second part. Seeing the officer look weak reinforces the estrangement. That seems counterintuitive.
Think about it from the stateless perspective. If I feel like I'm not protected, and then I see a video of the police running away from a guy shouting in Target, do I feel more protected?
No, of course not. I feel like the state is impotent. I feel like I'm on my own.
Exactly. So I'm estranged because I feel unsafe and unprotected. It's this terrible paradox that the Yale paper identifies: under protection and over policing.
That phrase was so powerful in the notes. Under protection and over policing. It sounds like a contradiction in terms.
But it's the lived reality for many neighborhoods. The text uses the example from Baltimore of so-called knockers or flex squads. These were plainclothes units, jumping out of unmarked cars.
The jump out boys, they're sometimes called.
Right, and their entire mandate was about stats. Get guns off the street, get drugs off the street, make arrests. They weren't walking a beat. They weren't getting to know the neighborhood. They weren't helping Mrs. Jones with her groceries. They were hunting. So the community feels over-policed because these guys are everywhere, shaking people down, creating fear.
Okay.
But, and here's the key to the paradox, if you call 911 because your house is being broken into, nobody shows up. Or they show up 3 hours later to take a report.
So you get all the harassment of a police state without any of the security of a police state.
You have perfectly described legal estrangement. And when that happens, the state starts to lose its monopoly on power, on violence. The community turns to self-help.
Which is a polite academic term. For what exactly?
For vigilante justice. For carrying a weapon because you don't trust the cops to save you. Or, in the worst case scenarios, for relying on local gangs to keep order because at least they are there. And every time that happens, the legitimate authority of the state dissolves a little bit more.
This connects so well to another source in our stack, the one from GW Law, about accountability networks. It frames this as a fundamental shift in how we think about and manage bureaucracy.
This gets a little theoretical, but stay with me because it explains the Elias story perfectly. Historically, in the 20th century, we operated on a model of expert administration.
Trust the professionals.
Exactly. We trusted the police chief, the health inspector, the school principal to be the experts in their field. We deferred to their judgment. We let them run the show.
But that trust is clearly eroded.
Completely.
Yeah.
So we shifted to a new model. Accountability networks. Now we have civilian review boards, we have inspector generals, we have auditors, and most crucially, we have millions of citizen journalists with iPhones ready to document every move.
The idea being, we don't trust you, so we're going to watch you constantly.
And look, accountability is necessary. It's vital. But the source argues there is a very real danger when the language of accountability slides into the language of illegitimacy.
What's the distinction there? They sound similar.
They're worlds apart. Accountability says, you made a mistake, fix it. It assumes the institution is valuable and worth saving. Illegitimacy says, you are fundamentally broken, corrupt, and shouldn't exist at all.
And if the message Elias and his generation are hearing is, you shouldn't exist, why in the world would he sign up to join?
Why would anyone? If the goal of the accountability network shifts from fixing the institution to dismantling it, you get a massive talent drain, recruitment collapses, and then we have to ask a very hard question. Who is left? Who is applying for these jobs?
There's a brutal quote in that British policing source about this very thing. It said, every place gets the police force it deserves.
That chills me every time I read it, because it's true. If we drive away the Elias candidates, the ones with a conscience, the ones who feel the call to service, we are left with the people who just want a gun and a badge. Or we're left with empty ranks and no one to answer the call at all.
And when the ranks are empty, the curtain twitchers take over, as the source put it.
The busybodies, the vigilantes, the loudmouths in the target aisle. When professional, accountable authority retreats, amateur, unaccountable authority steps in to fill the vacuum. And the amateur authority is usually much, much worse.
So we've identified the fuel for this fire. The legal estrangement, the broken contract, the enemy. But there's a massive accelerant here. Because that guy in Target wasn't just performing for the shoppers in the store, he was performing for the internet.
You absolutely cannot separate this behavior from the camera. The camera isn't just recording the event. The camera is, in a very real way, creating the event.
Okay, let's dive into the digital side of this, because I think this is where the why now question really clicks into place.
It's the engine of the whole process.
I want to tell you about a scenario that, it plays out millions of times a day online. Let's create a character. Let's call her Chloe. She's a teenager, maybe 19. She's not a political radical. She doesn't read Marx or Ayn Rand. But she lives on her phone. And she understands the currency of attention better than any sociologist.
She knows what sells. She knows what goes viral.
Exactly. She's scrolling through her feed and sees a video of a stranger screaming in the face of a federal agent. And what does she see underneath that video? 2.5 million likes, hero emojis, fire emojis, thousands of comments saying, get him, yes. To Chloe, this isn't a complex debate about immigration law. It's a blueprint. It's a tutorial on how to matter in 2024.
It's social learning theory on steroids. It's a live demonstration of what behavior gets rewarded.
Right. She learns that confrontation equals social currency. The digital world has effectively incentivized cruelty. It turns narcissism into a performance of virtue. And when she sees the crowd in the video join in, she learns that there are no negative consequences for being awful, only rewards in the form of digital clout.
She learns that the collective solvent works.
Collective solvent. I like that phrase. What do you mean by that?
It's the idea that these digital incentives act like a solvent that dissolves the glue of society. It dissolves patience, empathy, hesitation, the norm of minding your own business. It rewards the person who lights the match, not the person who tries to de-escalate.
As someone who creates content and lives online, I see this and it terrifies me. We are effectively and very efficiently training an entire generation that the loudest, most aggressive person in the room is the winner. And my question is, when the cameras are turned off and the likes stop rolling in, what kind of community are we actually leaving behind? We're filming the house as it burns just to prove we're holding the matches.
That blueprint idea you mentioned is backed up by some very hard data. We have a study from Yale News that really dissects this algorithm of rage.
This study fascinated me. They looked at something like 12.7 million tweets, right, from thousands of users.
12.7 million, a massive data set. And they didn't just look at a snapshot in time, they tracked how users' behavior changed over time. The first finding isn't that surprising. They found that social media algorithms amplify moral outrage. Because outrage generates engagement. It's simple. We click on what makes us mad.
We've known that for a while. It's the old media mantra, if it bleeds, it leads, just on a global, instantaneous scale.
Correct. But here is the nuance that blew my mind. The study found that users learn to express more outrage over time because they are rewarded for it with likes and shares. It's a textbook case of operant conditioning. Like training a lab rat with a food pellet. You post something angry, you get likes, that's the treat. So you post something even angrier next time to get a bigger reward.
Okay, but here's the part that I really did not expect. The study said this effect, this radicalization loop, was stronger for political moderates.
Yes. That is the critical finding, and it's so counterintuitive. You'd think the extremists on the fringes would be the ones spiraling down the rabbit hole, but the extremists are already maxed out on rage. They don't need the likes to be angry. They're angry anyway. But the politically moderate networks, the people in the middle, they are the ones who are most susceptible to this feedback loop of social rewards.
So the normal person, our Chloe, who maybe posts a picture of her lunch and gets 10 likes, then one day posts a rant about the police and gets 500 likes. Her brain is being radically reshaped by that feedback.
The algorithm is dragging the center toward the fringe. It's not just reflecting polarization, it's actively creating it. It's radicalizing the normies.
That explains so much about why the crowd in Target, who for the most part look like regular suburban shoppers, were cheering. They've been trained by their feed.
They've been trained. And there is another terrifying layer to this from that trustworthy AI source we looked at. It talks about the subversion of autonomy.
That sounds incredibly dystopian. Subversion of autonomy. It sounds like something out of a Philip K. Dick novel.
It basically is. It means that the AI, the recommender system, is bypassing your conscious, rational brain. You think you are angry because of your deep moral convictions about justice. You think, I am shouting at this officer because I am a patriot, or an activist, or a hero. But in reality, the recommender systems have been exploiting your cognitive biases for weeks to nudge you into that emotional state because that emotional state keeps you on the app longer.
So I think I'm acting on my own free will, but I'm actually just a puppet for engagement metrics. My rage is profitable for someone else.
You aren't the player, you're the ball. And the end result of this is the creation of what the paper calls epistemic bubbles.
Epistemic bubbles. Okay, break that down for us.
Episteme is the Greek word for knowledge. An epistemic bubble is a closed loop of information where you are sealed off from countervailing views. If your feed tells you 204/7 that every cop is a murderer, and my feed tells me 24/11 that every protester is a violent rioter, we aren't just disagreeing on policy anymore. We are living in fundamentally different realities.
We lose the shared basis for any kind of democratic deliberation. We can't even argue effectively because we aren't seeing the same world.
Exactly. And this brings us back to that study from the International Journal of Indian Psychology. It did a very simple thing. It compared social media users to non-users on measures of well-being and aggression.
I have a feeling I know how this turns out. I assume the non-users are happier.
Significantly happier. The non-users reported higher psychological well-being and measurably lower levels of aggression. The heavy social media users, on the other hand, were more aggressive, more anxious, and more prone to anger. The mechanisms cited were pretty straightforward: anonymity, a total lack of real-world accountability, and the echo chamber effect we just talked about.
So let's synthesize this. Let's try and put it all together because we've covered a lot of ground, from 19th century France to modern AI, and I want to see the whole ugly picture. It feels like a perfect storm.
It is a convergence, a self-reinforcing loop. Let's map the feedback cycle.
Okay, step one, the starting point.
Step one is legal estrangement. This is the fuel. Decades of things like over-policing and under-protection create a deep, simmering distrust in certain communities. People feel stateless. They start to believe the agents of the state, like the police, are illegitimate.
Okay, that's the fuel. What's step two?
Step two is anomie. The social contract snaps. The general norms of public conduct, politeness, civility, leaving people alone dissolve because people feel the deal with the state is broken. The brakes on our behavior fail.
And then step three, the match.
Step three is the digital accelerant. The algorithms see this conflict and they reward it. They teach us that aggression equals status. They turn the breakdown of social order into a viral moment, which then gets fed back into the system, creating more estrangement.
And the result is what we saw in the video, the institutional retreat. The police walk away because they are trained to and legally required to.
And when they walk away, what happens? The estrangement deepens. People say, see, they don't protect us, they're weak, they're illegitimate, and the cycle starts all over again, but this time it's worse.
That is incredibly bleak. But we promised a deep dive, not just a doom scroll. The sources did offer some potential paths forward. They weren't easy one-shot answers, but they were there.
They were. And what's interesting is that the solutions have to come from different directions simultaneously to address the different parts of the loop. You can't just fix one part.
Right. That pasted text source focused on the immediate problem of norms. It talked about the need for clarity.
Exactly. We have to reestablish the line between legitimate dissent and illegitimate interference. It's been blurred to the point of disappearing.
And it mentioned prosecutorial guidance as a key tool.
Yes. The source argues we need to be crystal clear. You have a First Amendment right to criticize the police. You can film them. You can stand on a sidewalk and tell them you hate them. But you do not have a right to physically impede them, to swarm them, to use fighting words that incite immediate violence. And prosecutors need to be willing to actually charge interference with official acts when that clear line is crossed.
It also mentioned the role of private property. This happened in a Target, not a public square.
That's a huge underutilized tool. A retailer has a duty to the safety and comfort of their other customers. If someone is screaming profanities and threats in the electronics aisle, that is not a free speech issue. That is a trespassing issue. Store managers need to be empowered and trained by corporate to say, you need to leave now before the mob forms.
Okay, so that's about reestablishing the institutional means of order. But that doesn't fix the underlying estrangement, does it? That just suppresses the symptom.
You're exactly right. If you only do the crackdown, you might actually make the estrangement worse. It could look like oppression. That's why the Yale Law Journal source is so important. It talks about deep structural repair. It talks about democratizing the police.
What does that look like in practice? It sounds good, but what does it mean?
It means giving communities actual, tangible power over how they are policed, not just a listening session where the chief nods politely and then ignores you. We're talking about real governance, real input on hiring, on policy, on budgets. If the community feels they own their police force, that it's theirs, not an occupying army, then the estrangement begins to vanish. You don't hate the police if the police are truly working for you.
And it also mentioned reconciliation.
Truth and reconciliation, acknowledging the harm done, acknowledging the knockers and the jump-out boys were a mistake. You have to validate the legitimacy of the grievance before you can ask for a return of respect for the institution.
Yeah, maybe, just maybe, relying less on the police for every single social problem.
That's the shrinking the footprint argument. It's a powerful one. If the only time you see a representative of the state, they are carrying a gun and have the power to arrest you, you will grow to hate the state. If we have other mechanisms, mental health response teams, community mediation, social workers that aren't armed agents, we dramatically reduce the number of friction points.
So it's a pincer movement, really. On one side, we need firm, clear boundaries on public conduct so our shared spaces don't descend into chaos. But on the other side, we need deep structural repair of the relationship between citizen and state so people actually want to follow the rules again.
And in the middle of all that, we all need to be a little smarter and more conscious about the algorithm in our pocket that is actively trying to sabotage both of those efforts for the sake of ad revenue.
We have to stop cheering for the fire.
We have to stop holding the matches.
Looking back at that video in St. Paul, the silence of those officers keeps coming back to me. They drove away. The crowd probably felt like they won. They chased off the occupiers. But did they win?
That is the tragedy at the heart of all of this. A society where authority retreats is not a free society. It is a power vacuum. And history teaches us, time and again, that power vacuums are rarely filled by the benevolent. They're filled by the strong, the loud, and the ruthless.
I want to leave you with a final thought on this. We've dissected the sociology, the law, and the tech. But let's go back to that Target aisle one last time. A society without enforceable norms does not become freer. It becomes louder. And the loudest voices are rarely the most ethical. The fundamental issue is not whether people should be allowed to criticize law enforcement. They should. The real issue is whether group intimidation in shared public spaces is the kind of behavior we intend to pass down to the next generation. If the answer to that is no, then our tolerance for it has to end somewhere. We have to decide where that line belongs.